Before I jump into this video, I want to encourage all of you to go check out my Patreon. If you haven't heard, I'm sure you have, every Warrior game broken down all the way through the playoffs, and hopefully, Warrior fans, a three-peat. But if you're not just a Warrior fan, you could be a fan of a rival, right? Or just an NBA fan, because you're getting my take on not just the Warriors, but their opponent in each game in itself. You can go back as far as 2.5 seasons of breakdowns and see how this all started. It's just $1 a month, man. And that's actually how I support myself. This YouTube stuff, well, it's all right, but it ain't paying the bills. And what I'm most proud of and where the bulk of my work goes is to Patreon. So go take a look. Go take a look. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into this part 2 Watch the Throne Western Conference. Because these are Western Conference teams and the Warriors see these guys all 3 or 4 times a year, I'm not going to get as much into the matchups and schematics because we know them. There's much more of a familiarity factor. I'm going to start off with the Los Angeles Lakers. And I know a lot of people, including Rob Pelinka himself, are saying no one wants to see us in the playoffs. Well, are y'all going to get in the playoffs? Right? The only way you really see this happening is perhaps a 1-8 matchup in the first round. Here's the problem with that. I never thought I'd be saying this, but the Lakers miss Lonzo Ball immensely. And everybody's waiting for LeBron to flip the switch and turn it on here after the All-Star break, and I'm sure he will. And I'm sure they'll make a push. We've seen Magic try to do damage control, LeBron a bit of damage control with his young roster, but I just don't know how much fight is going to be in this young roster. If they start to struggle, if things go bad, which they are on certain nights, there's not going to be much fight. And how much energy will LeBron have to use to even try to get to the 8th seed? So I have a prediction for y'all here early. I think LeBron shuts it down before the end of the regular season. And I don't see the Lakers making the playoffs. Now, I originally had them making the playoffs when this season started. But injury, combined with the way that Magic and Pelinka have handled these trade talks in this trade season, combine that with LeBron missing 18 games, and now they face a daunting task of trying to get that 8th seed with an injured roster, a disgruntled roster, and a LeBron coming off the longest layoff we've ever seen him have. So could LeBron put on his cape and lead them to the 8th seed? I'm sure he could. I've learned not to doubt him, but does he absolutely want to? How much will that take out of his body to just wind up in a first-round matchup with the Warriors? So, like I said, I think he shuts it down, and we see the Kings in that 8th seed who, no, they're not a threat to the throne yet, but should be a very entertaining matchup nonetheless. Houston, we have a problem. The Rockets' struggles are well documented. The injuries, the aging, the James Harden heroics. This is a very familiar story. Well, maybe not something that Rockets fans expected considering how last year went. And I want to credit Daryl Morey for the moves he's made to fill out this roster. Austin Rivers, Kenneth Faried, Iman Shumpert. I like all of those guys for certain scenarios, and I think they fit what they're doing. But let's take a look at Shumpert first. Shumpert, you would assume, okay, he's another guy they put on Durant. He's a defender, right? Well, he's not Ariza as far as length goes. He's not the guy. I've seen him match up with Durant several times in Cleveland and in Sacramento, and he just doesn't quite have the length to affect his mid-range shot like an Ariza does. He's strong and he's athletic, but he's more about 6'5", 6'6". That being said, Kenneth Faried is a guy that can hurt the Warriors on the offensive glass, right? His motor and his pick and roll game, and he's been rejuvenated with fresh legs. It feels like we haven't seen him in years, and he's had a nice impact with Capella out. But I will say one thing with Kenneth Faried is he can be exploited on the defensive end, particularly in off-ball action and screens, right? He just doesn't have the instincts for it. But that's never stopped D'Antoni before from playing a guy who is lackluster on that end of the court. The main guy that I like that they picked up, though, is Austin Rivers. And if you recall in the last matchup at Oracle Arena where Harden stole the show, it was Austin Rivers who bothered Steph Curry. His combination, he's about 6'5", he's long, but he's very quick, right? He's jitterbug quick, and he seemed to speed Steph's rhythm up and kind of kept him uncomfortable and sped up throughout that game. Considering Chris Paul's health and age, Austin Rivers may play a major part in a hypothetical rematch between these two. But ultimately, I think a lot of you know where I stand with this matchup and the style of play that Houston plays. What James Harden is doing is amazing, there's no doubt, but there's also no doubt that he's expending more energy than we've ever seen him use in a regular season. Chris Paul 1 year older, PJ Tucker 1 year older. I think this is the year we finally see Chris Paul become a liability on the court in the playoffs. I think we're going to see teams relentlessly attack him and essentially play him off the floor. So again, I bring back the importance of Austin Rivers, as well as Clint Capella getting back healthy. I think Clint Capella is going to have to become that second legit star to James Harden. The only way that I see this being a real legit matchup is the sooner the better if you're the Rockets, right? I would almost argue it would be beneficial for them to drop to the 8th seed and see Golden State in the first round while Harden still has something left in the battery. Because if it's the second or the third round and they get there somehow, I don't think they're going to have enough in the gas tank, Harden and CP in particular. That's why I rank them the third greatest threat to the throne. Next up, the Denver Nuggets. First thing I want to get out of the way is their home court is real. It is legit. Just look at the stats of any sports team in the Denver area. The altitude is a real factor, and you can see their teams, every sport team is designed for it. And in particular for basketball, it's the pace. Get up and down, play fast, have a lot of athletes. So that's something that needs to be considered because I think that they have the strongest home court outside of Oracle Arena within the Western Conference. Look, there are a lot of unknowns with this team. There's a lot of youth, and I think a lot of people around the league are hesitant to make them a legit contender despite their record and success thus far. And I want to point out a few reasons why beyond the home court that makes them dangerous. One, they're extremely capable of going nuts from the three-point line, right? If you've tuned into a Nuggets game and they're virtually unstoppable and they can hang $150 on you, especially in that altitude. Two, their depth, right? They go about 10 deep. If they can stay healthy, you can make an argument that they have the most depth within the Western Conference. I know the rotation's shortened, but you can't take into account injuries. That's where depth plays out in the playoffs. Looking into the specific matchup with the Warriors, Mike Malone, very familiar with the Warriors personnel and system. That helps as well. And then you look at Will Barton, who loves playing against the Warriors. You just look at the amount of guards they have. Again, asterisks if they are healthy. But they have 4 or 5 guards that can play in this matchup. And they have a variety of ways of playing small for these matchups with Golden State's guards. So you have to like that. And then again, talking about their depth, Mason Plumlee has been a real problem for the Warriors coming off the bench. He's so big and athletic and aggressive. And with the lack of depth in the front court, in particular the center position for the Warriors, that's a position and a player I circle and worry about. I think Paul Millsap is the X factor for them because you're just not sure the consistency you're going to get with young Harris and Murray. And those guys, don't get me wrong, they're going to have to shoot well and give them good minutes, but they don't have a lot of experience in veteran leadership. Millsap, if healthy, can play at an all-star level and needs to be that consistency and have that consistency and that leadership throughout their playoff run. Ultimately, though, I know a lot of you aren't going to like this, but I just don't trust Jokic in a series with the Warriors. He gets put in a high pick and roll and attacked relentlessly. I'm not sure he can stay on the floor with his foot speed. I know how smart and crafty he is, and he's made better efforts and strides this year on that end, but I think teams are kind of saving it for the playoffs to truly exploit Jokic. Not every team may have the personnel to efficiently attack him on those high pick and rolls, but you look at a Warriors, a Portland, a Houston, and it could be a real problem keeping him on the floor. I like their young core, and I'm a Jamal Murray believer, but I think this go-around, this playoff run, at some point, I think they're going to be just happy to be there. And it's going to be this season of experience, of experiencing the playoffs and the intensity. I expect them to have big nights, and as I had mentioned before, they can get extremely hot. I think their ceiling is very high. If they're healthy, they're clicking, and they're playing at home, they can be extremely dangerous. But in the end, I think that they're going to fall short due to a lack of experience. I've got them number 2 in the Western Conference as far as threats to the Warriors. That leaves the top spot, and I think you can figure it out now, virtue of process of elimination. It's the Oklahoma City Thunder. And now I'm not telling you guys something you don't already know. I think everybody is kind of, eyes have been opened to how dangerous and potentially good this team can be on the strength of Paul George's MVP campaign. A lot of young athletes added to this team, and a new chemistry makes them scary. The first thing that I want to point out as far as why they are such a threat is the emotional juice that they would use against Kevin Durant entering Oklahoma City in a playoff-like atmosphere. Because say what you want about Russell Westbrook, and I've said a lot, he is a leader in the sense of the team plays for him. The crowd gets up for him, and guys tend to play harder when he plays harder, right? He is their volume knob. And the volume will be turned to 100 with Kevin Durant in Oklahoma City in a playoff series. And we know how Westbrook thrives on emotions. So I think that would turn up the entire team, and it would possibly be the most hostile environment that this Warriors dynasty has played against, or in, I should say. The second factor is much more obvious. You can see it with your eyes. It's Paul George and the length and athleticism that this Oklahoma City Thunder team has. Presti, obsessed with long, bouncy athletes, has accumulated a team full of them that's easily the most athletic team in the league. Diallo, Burton, Ferguson, Noel, Paul George, Russell Westbrook, Adams. They have athletes at every position. And what that does is it allows them to overplay passing lanes, be extra aggressive, create turnovers, and still recover at the rim. And we know in a pass-happy offense that the Warriors have, it's problematic. The third huge question mark, I think, is what do the Warriors do with Steven Adams? It feels like he's an automatic 20 rebounds whenever he plays Golden State. Now, I know DeMarcus Cousins getting healthier, and we haven't really seen him within this matchup. But you got to think that that's going to be a tough matchup for DeMarcus to stay out of foul trouble. You talk about how physical he is. Well, Adams is more physical. The X factor that I'd like to bring up is the rumor of Damian Jones being ready by the playoffs. Warrior fans, those of you that may remember, he kind of had a coming out party early in the season against Steven Adams, neutralizing his size and strength in the paint. So it remains to be seen if he'll be healthy or the Warriors pick up another center on the buyout market for insurance. If you were going to pick a player to match up one-on-one with Kevin Durant right now in the league, I think most people would pick Paul George. And his MVP campaign is legit, playing two ways, but is it sustainable? Someone ran off a stat that he's shooting 50% on contested threes right now. The law of averages suggests that what Paul George is doing right now is just not sustainable. He's taking and making a lot of difficult shots. But something that won't leave him and that is sustainable is his defense. And you have to think that he's going to match up well against Kevin Durant and allow the Thunder, more importantly, to guard Kevin Durant one-on-one. So now my eyes and my focus shift to the point guard matchup. Two contrasting styles. I'm not going to dive into who's better because I don't think it's much of an argument. But styles, context, teammates, it all matters. There's so many factors. But I think a real fear that the Thunder should have is Russell Westbrook getting caught up in a shootout with the greatest shooter of all time. Now, Russ is on his triple-double streak, and he's been deferring to Paul George, and that's all well and good in the regular season. But will that same thing happen in a playoff series? When Steph Curry comes down the court and hits 3 threes in a row, is Russ not going to come back down the court and shoot threes right back at him at a 26% clip and start getting caught up in the game within the game? I think that there's a real threat of that happening within this series. In the end, though, I think it'll just come down to shooting. Can these young players for Oklahoma City shoot well enough to compete with this Warriors team? Diallo, Ferguson, Burton, Schroeder. Can these guys knock down the threes? Because at some point, Golden State's going to force the ball out of Paul George's hands, especially the way Westbrook is shooting, right? And so, can their young athletic others continue to knock down open shots? Because if they can, we're looking at perhaps a 7-game series. And that's why, to me, the Oklahoma City Thunder are the greatest threat in the Western Conference to the Warriors' throne.
I've been winning so long, it's like alchemy.